I'm going to start this lesson off with the 4 personality types in modern psychology. The first thing that I want to mention about self-pity and embarrassment and shame and being insecure about what other people think of you is that this is an imbalance of energy. Any of the negative traits, negative mental states are imbalances. But it happens to be the case that cosmically, universally, intrinsically, people with a lot of feminine energy, whose dominant personality types are amiable and analytical. These are modern psychology terms of the 4 personalities. Just the amiable and analytical part. If they have these feminine energies, which are found in all things, the masculine and feminine energies in all things of the cosmos, these people tend to struggle with self-esteem. It's not a sexist statement. Both masculine and feminine energies have their quirks and their, shortcomings and their strengths. This is just one of them for the feminine energy. So it's the nature of these types. This is because people who have these sort of negating or receptive polars in their psyche have an innate, or rather poles, innate attention to detail. In fact, this is the strength of these 2 types, the analytical disposition. Personality types. Analytical disposition endows a person with craftsmanship and stubborn dedication. The amiable or supportive nature is observant and empathetic. And people like this have a high emotional capacity, including emotions like remorse and compassion. But all strengths have their equal and opposite negative traits. So when feminine energy is exaggerated or out of balance, this quality of mind can cause a person's awareness to become very narrow and fixated on minor observations. So the end result becomes insecurity, overthinking, taking things too seriously, perfectionism, embarrassment, and an overly critical perception. So what's happening is, without having to wait through this entire lecture, I'm just going to mention this now, is that a detail-oriented perception is very much like being zoomed into a subject, zooming into things. When you zoom into things, you see details and you see significant parts, but you actually lose perspective. You lose context. Right. That's why when you read descriptions of Virgo or Scorpio sometimes too, these people with very, very strong attention to detail, they spot all sorts of details and particularly flaws, and they lose awareness of the bigger picture. They lose sight of the bigger picture. So they're losing the meaning of the context, the point of something, and just getting kind of too concerned about small details. So that's a loss of perspective. You're not putting things into perspective. You're seeing one thing instead of seeing all the things as a whole. This happens in people and situations and relationships. It's a big problem. So my first recommendation is to consider whether or not you have an innate abundance of feminine energy. And the way to find this out is, in fact, through your astrology. So yes, the 4 personality types in modern psychology that modern psychology uses now explains to us a rebranding of the 4 natural elements or astrological elements of nature. These being earth, water, air, and fire, right? The 12 zodiac signs correspond to these 4 elements. So these correspond with each other the same way, but the elements correspond with the personality types in the same way. So the way to find out which 4 personality types you have most prominently is by finding out your personality placements astrologically. So these are your sun sign, your moon sign, and your rising sign. Without going into extensive detail, your sun sign is who you are on the outside, what you present to people. It's responsible for much of your self-expression, your taste, and your thinking. Your moon sign is your other half. It is who you are on the inside. It is your subconsciousness. In actuality, it's your subconsciousness, your desires, your fears, your instincts. Now, this humanity, this species, is 97% subconsciousness or ego. So we're a lunar race. We're ruled by the moon. We're so governed by it and under its influence. So the moon sign is a very significant part of who we are. But unfortunately, it's mechanical and instinctual and automatic. And that's a whole nother topic related to evolution and enlightenment that we do not have time or relevance to get into right now. The rising sign is the sun's position at the hour in which you were born. So it changes on an hourly basis. You can think of it as a spice because it doesn't have a strong influence over the sun or the moon themselves. It just adds I think it adds a dash or flavor of personality to what you already have. It's like the spice on a dish. It doesn't change the recipe altogether or the dish. If you have like a chicken sandwich or something, it's like just changing the spices or the sauces. It's still the same dish. So it doesn't have a major influence over the sun, like the way the sun and the moon sign have on you. And the rest of the planets that we've maybe heard about, like the Jupiter and the Venus and stuff, those are other aspects of your life. Those don't directly influence your personality. They're secondary. So when we look up our astrology, if one of these signs, particularly the sun or moon, are in anywhere near a feminine sign, their feminine sign or it's near a feminine sign like Virgo or Scorpio in particular of this lecture, or Taurus or Pisces, maybe Cancer or Capricorn. This is often the reason why certain people are very sensitive and our feelings of self-criticism and insecurity or embarrassment are very strong. And obviously there's so much conditioning and trauma and stuff that makes us sensitive. But if you're just by nature like this, intrinsically, irrespective of your raising and your culture, this is certainly it. This will predispose you to be like this. And also when you're doing this, checking your astrology and your elements, you have to always consider any cusps or nearby signs. Nearby signs by looking at the degrees of the signs, not just the name of it that shows up. Because of course nature creates in a spectrum. Things aren't just on or off, black and white. When you change into if you're on December, born December 23rd, well, that's right between Sagittarius and Capricorn. So you'll have pretty much 50% of both. You'll have a 50-50 mixture of both. So you have to look at the degrees, right? If there are 30 degrees in a sign, then 15 is right in the middle. 30 is a cusp on the later end, and 0 or 1 is a cusp on the early side. And every sign has an element. So these elements and signs that comprise the personality are found in the sun, moon, and rising. So we don't have to concern ourselves too much with the rest of the natal chart. Okay. So about Virgo. Virgo is the perfectionist sign out of all of them. There are other perfectionist signs, you could say, but, like the earth signs, but Virgo and Scorpio are very similar to one another in that way. So they're habituated to spotting flaws and imperfections in people and situations, or anything really. sometimes Virgos over label. This is everything about, especially as an imbalance, if we're talking about imbalances or developing, maturing people, maturing Virgos who are still growing up, like as teenagers into their adolescence. Everything is over this, over that. Really, like just over everything. Over extreme thinkers, over labeling, over distinguishing, over organizing. Like it's more than what the average person does. Seeing things, seeing differences in things or distinguishments in things that are not really there, nearly the same, or in fact have no perceptible difference, but because they're good at distinguishing things, they can over distinguish, and they think they're seeing a difference in size or a difference in a type of something, and there's really no difference. Now, Scorpio is the water equivalent to Virgo. The two are very similar, except that they belong to different elements. So Virgo is more cosmetically perfectionist, aesthetically oriented, materialistic. Scorpio is kind of perfectionist too, but it's more on a moralistic or ethical way, where they don't like being criticized about being a bad person or being a cheater or a liar. And they don't like other people being like that too. That's what they criticize other people for a lot of the time. So they're similar in that they have the tendency to they're so discerning and so observant, they will overread subtle body language, and they're sensitive, right? Maybe you don't mean to sound like you're lying, but if you're nervous around a Virgo, they'll think you're lying, right? They'll take that as, they'll see it very easily. For as an example, so due to the fact they're highly observant. This unfortunately leads to paranoia and suspicion. They're the most paranoid, suspicious people. They don't trust people. They're so untrusting. Both signs are sensitive to criticism. They take things very seriously. They get jealous very easily over little things, small things, anything, because they spot the details, and that seems those details blow out of proportion for them. And because they're so perfectionist, they're proud. They're prouder than they realize they have to be. They think they should be proud. They need to. They need to protect these things that they know, and they need to prove to people that they're good enough at this, good enough at that. And that's a big problem, because average person doesn't really feel that way. They're more laid back. When you know your worth, you don't feel the need to prove things to people, because you know that, you're part of the human species, and how could you be that bad, right? So because they're so proud, they get defensive very easily and take things. So they get very defensive. They think it's good to prove to you that they're right, or that you're not, your criticism is wrong. And they take things very personally, very easily, and it matters to them. And they worry a lot too. So if you say, hey, is that sign readable? Can you read that sign that I put up there by the dish pit, by the cutlery dish pit? They're going to say, oh no, I didn't put anything there. That wasn't me. But you didn't ask that question though. You didn't say, did you put that there? You said, you're asking is that sign that I put up there noticeable? Like, do you think the other servers are going to notice it? Right? So they made it about them, but why? Because they're self-absorbed that way, because they're perfectionist. That's why they take things personally. Small failures and power struggles can lead to strong and very unnecessary feelings of inferiority. Yeah, strong inferiority complex, strong superiority complex over little things too. Like if you have a small argument with someone like this, they can feel like above you just because they won a small argument, or because they pointed out some flaw you have. All of a sudden they feel above you, and it's like, everyone has these kinds of flaws, or nobody cares. Like, okay, you won this little argument. Do you think I care? They think you care, and you don't. Yeah, it's very petty. And then likewise, when they lose some small power struggle, like they forgot, to add the garnish on the soup or something at work, like they feel so, oh man, they feel so belittled by that. So when it comes to handling criticism, for Virgo especially, they really can't handle any criticism. Their perfectionism is calibrated to such a high level that they genuinely think it's not okay to be whatever you criticize them to be. Almost anything you criticize a Virgo for appears, really, almost anything you say to them, it'll really affect them. They'll think it's a big deal. Like they might get nervous about it or feel bad about it, and you're thinking it's not a big deal, just do better next time, but they feel so bad about it. And yeah, it appears to them as very serious shortcoming that they should be ashamed about. And when you compare this to, and I'm kind of referring to more like adolescence here, right? But I know this to be true because they compare this to a mature adult. An adult knows that not everything we get criticized for is a big deal. An adult can discern what's shameful and what's acceptable, but Virgos really struggle at this. Basically, everything seems to be a big deal, especially when they're young. Their standards are way too high. It's impossible. Every flaw matters to them. They don't develop reasonable perception until, like, these people can be in their 30s and finally they get it. Finally, they realize that all these things are not a big deal. They know their worth now. They don't care what people think. It takes them too long to realize this. And in some cases, they never loosen up their standards. And it's impossible. These are the people you work with when they become managers, and they're impossible to please. And they always disagree with you in arguments, and they think that you're wrong about something because the wording you use is slightly off, but it's the same thing that you're both talking about. Or they think you did a bad job at at cooking something, or the coffee that you made, and you can't tell any difference between this coffee and the other one that the other person who's been working here for a while made. Too high of standards. In my case, for example, when I was 16 in high school, there was a point where I went through a very challenging breakup phase that lasted for months, and during which my ex was constantly criticizing me behind my back. And out of those criticisms, there wasn't one that I could just handle and be okay with. Maybe, well, there was one, but out of a few criticisms, I could not handle them. One of them, and these are just little things, I guess you could say. One of them was half the things that I said, I don't know what I'm talking about. Well, that definitely shocked me and embarrassed me. I thought I was better at speaking and making sense. Another thing she said was that, and very sincerely to me, in fact, was that I was a simple person and she needed someone who could understand her problems. Well, I hated that one too, because I thought I was a great counselor who could solve anyone's problem. And I had never had a problem convincing people that they're going to be okay, they can do something, etc. I mean, they can get over their, I mean, they can conquer their problems. And this was one of the reasons why she was breaking up with me. It was because she had this problem with depression, and I didn't even realize she had depression. I wasn't sure what she was describing, so I couldn't help her. And the concept of being simple had never come across my mind back then. That's another thing. Anything you say to a Virgo, they're gonna they'll just immediately overthink it. And because they overthink, they're not going to immediately just get the simple meaning of what you just said. Like what you're saying is probably simple, but start analyzing and overthinking and overcomplicating what you really mean. So when I get criticized back then, when I was getting criticized, wasn't always sure what she meant, just thinking about it too much. You know, that idea of being simple never came across my mind, especially because, you know, everyone else I knew was doing the same things I was back at that age, going to school, playing video games, smoking weed, practicing BMX at the skate park. I mean, isn't everyone simple in that respect? Don't most people do stuff like that in small towns? What else is there to do? So to hear that for the first time just really threw me off, and it insulted me at first. So this is a very important example, because the truth is I never actually got over that one criticism until I was like 25 years old. So it took me a whopping 9 years to realize that, first off, she's actually right. I mean, on the inside, my nature is quite simple. I'm a very, really simple to please, reliable, grounded person. I don't need a lot to be happy and entertained. And second, that there's nothing wrong with being a simple person. But being overly critical and perfectionist at the time, everything just seemed like a bad trait. I'm not saying I'm a Virgo. I'm not a Virgo sun, but I have a cusp though, so that's enough to get really confused. I made so many angry, sarcastic memes about the simple person thing back then, and I don't know if she saw any of them. Other people did. The internet did. I even sent her these weird art package letters to her, and when I was like 23. And not because I cared about her, but because I cared about myself, my self-image so much that I just had to prove myself, and it was all just so stupid and petty. I had no idea how unnecessary it was, so proud and petty. That's how seriously people like me take criticism. So people really don't know how to handle criticism, because I certainly didn't. They can't, there's no discernment. I didn't have much discernment. These kinds of people like me can't discern between shameful and acceptable. What is shameful and what is acceptable? What you should actually be embarrassed about or ashamed of, and what is not a big deal. They think everything you should be ashamed of. That's why you have these friends. They're like, oh, so and so is weird, and they're weird, and you're weird, and this is weird. If you have friends who just constantly say so and so is weird, you'll notice that they're also Virgo. They usually have that somewhere. You know, it might show up as Leo or something, but they're next to Virgo, something like that, right? So I was dysfunctionally perfectionist until like age 25. So Virgo belongs to the meticulous and detail-oriented element of Earth. Scorpio belongs to the nurturing and empathic element of water. Neither Virgo nor Scorpio are air signs, so rather than perceiving the world in a very balanced and bigger picture contextual way with perspective, assessing, both sides of the story, looking at things as a whole, looking at both the good and the bad parts of a relationship, for example, and the good parts, the times, for example, the times they said sorry when they were rude to you as a narcissist. Maybe they did say sorry a few times. You can't be too negative, otherwise you won't see that. Considering alternative perspectives, all things that air signs do, earth and water signs are not like this. They tend to get very consumed in details, and they're critical and pessimistic. They see too much of the flaws and injustices. They lose awareness. It's a matter of concentration, right? You lose awareness of the context, perspective, other side of the story. When things go wrong in relationships, these two signs in particular, these two empathic signs, can drown in their own silence and become lost when they lose their sense of balance or justice. So confusion and words left unspoken are primary pitfalls, and they think it's a big deal. They think they need to prove things and say things, and most of the time they don't. They grow up, like me, they grow up and they realize, you know what, gee, all that stuff I cared about was not really a big deal. As with taking things too seriously, what Virgoans must realize is that much of the time when they're criticized, it's usually minor. Even the people who point their finger at you may not view you as negatively as you think. People might sound very critical, or like other people can be kind of critical too, but really they're just in a bad mood and they don't really care what they think about you. They're either in a bad mood and they'll just quickly change their mind, or they're not even taking what they're saying seriously. So only you care, and they actually don't care. They're just in a bad mood. Because I've noticed myself sometimes doing this, where maybe I'm in a bad mood and I'm criticizing someone, or I'm thinking like, man, why is my friend like that? But I don't really care about it. Like, I don't I'm not actually looking down on them, or I don't see them with kind of like a cringe or disgust or anything. It's just a little complaint. Or they're pointing something out that at the end of the day, right? So same thing. They're pointing something out at the end of the day that isn't generally considered that substantial. Something that only you consider to be a big deal and worth feeling insecure over. The challenge with Virgo is that they often grow up assuming that others are just like them, just as observant and sensitive like them, and sharing the same high standards as them. And that leads them to view people under the same critical light. So of course they worry so much, because if you think other people are just as perfectionist and critical as you're going to be on your toes all the time. That's why they're controlling. Scorpio and Virgo are so controlling. They have to control the situation so that you don't see them under the wrong light. It's interesting, these people don't behave naturally, right? There are people out there like the water signs, they behave naturally, right? They be themselves. When they make the mistakes, they don't care. They just embrace it because they're just being themselves. But Virgo and Scorpio aren't like that. They have to control their behavior so much. They're so rigid because they want to come off the right way, and they care so much about it. And that's very difficult and challenging to be like that. It's stressful. Like around age 24, 25 is finally when I stopped feeling the need to control how I behave and what I say, and just letting myself just naturally behave. Instead of writing things down before I go out, like writing comebacks to people before I go out, just in case someone says something to me and I don't know what to say. Like, stop doing stuff like that. This idea that other people are just as critical as them is mostly not true. Not everyone has this kind of perception. Other signs don't perceive the world in the same way with such detail and observation. Only a few other similar signs are like that. But it is certainly Virgo and Scorpio that really overthink and overcomplicate things. What people say and situations, and man, do they scheme and critically think, if so-and-so said that, they mean this. and they mean this so that they can do this, and then they get so paranoid, like there's some crazy scheme going on over nothing. I used to think that way. Way overcomplicating, like these crazy ideas that are situations that are very unlikely for people to do to you. You know, they say something, they gossip behind your back, and all of a sudden now you think that they're trying to deliberately spread a rumor about you and hurt you. And it was all, what, a plot that from the beginning? No, it's crazy. It's way over complicating. It doesn't matter what you do or how amazing your profile picture looks around a very young Virgo in their teens. They will always, regardless of what it is, endlessly spot loopholes and flaws in any person or photo or situation. It's contradictory, right? It's just their nature. They can do this. It's not as bad when they grow up. So what Virgons can learn, however, is that their constant self-improvement tends to be really obsessive and simply the result of a weak sense of self-worth. It can lead to contradictory behavior because when you're so critical, you say, no, that's not good enough. Let's try this picture or profile picture or something if you're on the dating site or something like that. You say, no, let's do this one. No, that's too much this. Let's do this one. That's too much this. There really is no solution at the end of all the scanning. If you're working on your own profile picture, I mean, like, how can every option in life that you're looking at not be the solution? It's contradictory. But they see flaws in everything. These are precisely the kinds of overcritical and even contradictory perspectives that Virgos can have about themselves and others. And I used to think this way too. When someone seems very just and righteous or good, whatever it is, there's just, you think that there's something wrong or off with them. It's this natural skepticism that you have. So this is analysis. This causes analysis paralysis, where it's that inability to decide what you should do or say with yourself, or I mean, what you should do or say around others, because every option just seems to have a flaw to it. And of course, you care too much about these imbalances or flaws, so there's no solution. They're never satisfied with anything. That's what Michael Jackson said. He said, I'm a perfectionist. I'm never satisfied with anything. But it seems, when you're never satisfied with anything, it seems that happiness and the things that you want are never, it seems impossible to get any satisfaction. And oftentimes these people don't get a lot of satisfaction from whatever it is they want, because they always spot some flaw to it. So it's impossible for some time when they're young, at least, right? When they're older, they become more realistic. So the lesson is to just relax and realize that you're fine just the way you are, and others recognize that. Scorpio is not so bad. They're more natural when it comes to their self-image. So here's some more examples of, narrow critical perspective and broad, wide perspective. The dichotomy between earth and air. Dave is a simple guy. Well, actually, no, he's a lazy and irresponsible guy, mostly. Well, actually, then again, he's very good at what he does, but he's a narrow-minded guy. Or maybe he doesn't care. Well, he's a nice guy and he never gets angry. He's too much of a nice guy. I'm not into that. Actually, no, I do recall that one time he blew up at Jane 3 years ago. Oh, God. What was that? That was terrible. But I guess you're right. Dave is pretty amazing. Pretty amazing, competent guy once you get past all the details. And this other person, their mentality is, yeah, Dave's a great guy overall. These are opposing energies. One's feminine, one's masculine, one's detail oriented, one's like contextual. So there's excessive judgment, overthinking on the initial, the first figure. But more often than not, these shortcomings that this kind of person spots is insubstantial to the average person. Being earth signs, Virgos can develop very narrow and extreme views because they overanalyze flaws and imperfections without perspective. I mentioned this. This is what I mentioned initially. Air signs like Libra, in contrast, have the habit of creating an average opinion based on the sum of many attributes. So as an air sign, they tend to have more perspective on things, greater context. They look at things from a slight distance. So when it comes to pleasing a Virgo, I mean, it's impossible if they're young. Like, you either have to confuse the heck out of them by doing and being everything all at once, and that way it's hard for them to criticize you for anything. Or you have to just stay completely on top of things and remain flawless. Showing a Virgo that you don't care what others think of you will either greatly impress them or frustrate them, demonstrating to them that, that maybe you don't want to change and improve yourself the way they want to. But it also reminds them how insecure and critical they are, being the most perfectionist sign on the zodiacal wheel. Libra, for instance, being an air sign, generally has accurate and high opinions about themselves and others, since they look at things as a whole. And, Libra has the scales, so they're very shrewd at judging both sides of a story, looking at the goods and the bads of a person or a situation. They're not conceited. They're very balanced. They carry a forgiving attitude and don't look down on people just for being average or silly or weird or being different or because of something that happened in the past or because of a power struggle. So unlike earth signs who carry stubborn and specific memories from the past, or fire signs who distort their perception with anger and passion, the level-headedness and small ego-ness of the air signs give them very reasonable and shrewd, clear perspective on situations and people, on their judgment. So this notorious trait of Virgo being overly critical, it's a prominent trait that you'll read everywhere when you look them up. There's somebody who has this in their sun or their moon. It's a tendency that typically lasts with the person until they reach adulthood. But it, even trails on all the way until around, for people with a lot of Virgo, they don't really stop being overly critical or insecure until they're in their early 30s. And I would say for people with some influence of it, with a cusp, but then some other energies like air and stuff, because this is from my own experience and observation, people balance out generally around 26 when they have much higher self-esteem and much more laid back. They don't care what people think, right? You really start to become an adult around that age. That's when it starts to level out. Like, your standards for yourselves and people become more reasonable. So it takes a very long time to develop this balanced, reasonable perspective that a mature adult has. So I think it's much better to learn about this sort of thing now when you're young, because you don't want to take, 30 years of your life to be to see the world the way an average person does. And it's not difficult to explain and understand these concepts once it's shown to you. I think it's good to learn about the different perceptions that exist potentially in people, the different predispositions and the elements when you're young, than to struggle through life falling into the same mistakes and conflicts and embarrassments and get-overs that youth experience, learning this on your own slowly until you finally reach your late 20s or early 30s, and then you finally realize that so much of it was not a big deal, it was nothing. It wasn't other people that you had to please, but just your own critical mind that had to just loosen up. It was playing tricks on you. Because from my experience, I wish I learned this when I was younger. I did so many strange, obsessive, creepy things, really going out of my way to prove things to people that I didn't need to prove. And there were so many petty and proud and obsessive things just to prove some little ability that I had that really wasn't worth it in the end, because my standards were too high. So I couldn't just accept myself for being myself. So to summarize, these are the negative traits that result from perfectionism. Binary thinker, winner, loser, all or nothing mentality. Petty, fussy, minutia, too much fascination with small things in life. Trouble prioritizing what really matters. Perfectionist, overly critical, overly cautious, anxious, insecure, taking everything in life too seriously. Loss of awareness of the bigger picture, context, the whole story, the other side of the story, due to the fixation of details and injustices. Overthinking, uncertain of one's worth. Overthinking criticism, feeling the need to prove emotions or abilities to others. Yeah, even emotions, something like emotions too. You don't want to overthink that sort of thing. I used to think that maybe I had to prove that I had emotions to people. I don't think you have to. I think people just assume that. Or proving your abilities to people. Why do you have to prove your abilities to people when you're a human? We all have potential and abilities. You shouldn't have to prove things. Stubborn, proud of countless skills that anyone can learn. So not just regular pride, but I mean petty pride. Proud of things that are not worth showing off. Ashamed of minor events that others don't remember. Over-labeling, over-categorizing, over-distinguishing, seeing differences that don't really exist, aren't really there, or are barely perceptible. Weak personal boundaries, people pleaser, giving too much, asking for permission when permission is not needed, changing yourself to look better for others, rigid, traditionalist, which leads to being soft in the head, difficulty thinking for oneself. This is more of a general earth energy. Some people, the earth energy is very grounded in the mechanical, instinctual behaviors. So people with a lot of earth, they don't think very much. They are way more habituated to motor instinctual movements and going through routines. It's quite interesting. But it's hard to think for yourself when you're just so used to following, a manual or a routine, a regimen. So you can be soft in the head from that. Difficulty thinking for yourself, coming up with your own ideas, doing things in your own way, and being your own person, living your own life. Because even if you can do things your own way, you might be insecure about what other people think. This serves as a big reminder for men, especially. A lot of people aren't aware that perfectionism and feeling insecure or embarrassed is actually a fundamentally feminine quality. It's a cosmic feminine trait. It's universal. So when men discover this, they immediately realize that they've been sitting in their feminine too much. So they snap out of it, so to speak. And as I think I mentioned, for women, this doesn't not apply to women. It does. Women can apply this by just embracing that masculine side of them that is very independent and doesn't care what people think. So masculine energy is not petty or complicated. Masculine energy allows a person to see the overall picture in a thing or situation, to see things in perspective, in context, and prioritize through details in order to handle the meat and potatoes. This energy is very independent because people who have it have this innate ability to just be themselves without shame or the need for approval. So if we take the natural element of fire, for example, like a warrior, people with a lot of fire do and say what they please because they feel that right to be themselves very strongly. So they generally don't have much problem with other people's opinions. From a Buddhist perspective, from a human perspective, at the true human level, anger, for instance, is something to be ashamed of. It's not dignifying to express anger, to lose your self-control, either or. But because we live in a more egotistical world, even all sorts of even undignifying or shameful things and other kinds of circumstances, fire signs still may not care what people think. But the general attitude is very independent, and it's good for the most part to have that, to just, especially with minor things, to not care what people think of you, more superficial things. So these kinds of people have an inborn inclination to think for themselves and do things their own way, rather than mimic and adopt the behavior of other people. Now, this isn't to say that masculine energy doesn't have its own negative traits as well. Of course, everything has its equal opposite, or its polar opposite. All personality types and attributes have their invariant side. So, for example, although masculine energy is active and imposing, people with too much of it, or if it's not controlled because of the ego, they get bored easily and they need constant stimulation. That's something that we just generally always have when we have that active energy. Other times, because, as I said, you need more self-control to control things like anger, or hyperactivity, or talking over people, or interrupting people. So fire and air too can be impatient. Fire signs are selfish or narcissistic, and the masculine energy has less capacity for conscious emotions, which leads them to becoming superficial, and they can be deceitful, lacking in moral discipline. So one thing I recommend everyone do is learn to make other people's opinions irrelevant. Realize that your job in life is to be you, and that you can't please everyone because It's impossible. And it would deny and neglect your own personality or character. You will come off as more certain in yourself if you simply shift your attitude when you're in those situations where you feel kind of belittled or you lost an argument or something, whatever it is, to just shift your attitude and just own it and be okay with it and not take things so seriously. If you own everything about yourself around people in these situations, when you're conversing, whether there are challenges, but you're including your mistakes and imperfections, you don't deny them, you don't hide from them, it tells everyone that you don't give a damn, you're not insecure, and you know your worth. So this shift in attitude alone, shifting into a masculine, independent attitude, it's still very effective even when other people don't agree with you. And if you're not happy with the way someone views you, you gave someone the wrong impression and you're thinking to yourself, they think I'm like that? I didn't know I had so many flaws. I'm not like that. I have to prove myself to them. Well, you might as well just embrace it. Own the character that they think you are. Or just don't worry about it too much and don't worry about the flaw or criticism. Just do better next time. A helpful mindset to carry is the courage to be disliked, which is also the title of a book by Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitake Koga. At one point in the book, the authors say that you may not be able to change the way others view you, but you can change the way that you view yourself. And what the authors are implying is that in return, this makes people understand how you feel about yourself. In the dating and social arts community, this personal attitude is called a frame. A frame is a term that includes a number of things. Your frame is what holds your unique point of view. It's everything: your body language, your tone of voice, your attitude, the way you express yourself. It's your values, your opinions, and how you express them. So people can sense your frame because it expresses itself in these different ways, and the way you dress as well, the way you walk, the way you talk. If you're very certain about everything, and this means that your frame is very strong. No matter what people say or think about you or your point of view, you rarely second guess yourself or feel the need to change your opinion just to please other people. So here's a simple rule that helps clarify what's worth caring about in life. As long as you're not doing anything wrong per se, nothing too extreme or out of the ordinary, if you have a good idea of what is normal, common, and acceptable in the place you live, then there is no reason to worry about what people think. So for example, if somebody doesn't like a certain picture of you on Facebook or on a dating site, well, you're not doing anything wrong because it's just a photo of you. You need photos of yourself for certain applications. And you can't do anything but your genetics, so you don't worry about it. This applies to a lot of things, this idea. Not to mention that truly being insecure, caring what people think, as I said, is feminine. It's just a sign of immaturity. If you want to be an adult, right, it's an immature characteristic to be like that. So it's a lack of independence. If you want to be an adult, just stop caring what people think, because this is what happens when you grow up: is you stop caring. You stop taking things so seriously. You realize how precious time is. You don't waste time on negative emotions. And the only times that you should care what people think or you should feel shame are the times when your dignity is being challenged. And I'll mention that in another lecture, but your dignity is different than your pride. Dignity and pride are different, right? Your dignity is a virtuous thing to protect. From an enlightened perspective, dignity is a conscious virtue. It basically means that when you keep your dignity, you're somebody who doesn't do bad things. That's when, if you're accused of doing significantly bad things, then it's worth actually feeling embarrassed about or ashamed about. I'll get into what those bad things are. I'll hint at some of them, like being accused of certain crimes. And most crimes are not, I don't know what the word is, but there's no dignity in them, right? So I'll cover that in another lecture. That's why I said the rule is if you're not doing anything wrong, nothing too like creepy or weird or like a crime of some sort, then don't worry what people think. And the fourth reason you can stop worrying about, or I guess this is fifth reason now that I mentioned that, stop worrying what people think of you is because of what I call the anchor of balance or the law of balance. And this ties in with knowing your worth. It's related to knowing your worth. Or I think a better name is the law of average. And the rule is that if you understand that the average person has a lot of potential, we're all human beings here, we're all the same species, we're relatively the same. All of us are doing something important with our life, right? Where we want to, we're working on something, so we don't have to entertain these insecurities like jealousy and criticism because we have potential and we have worth, and pretty much all of us can get that other thing that person has, if we tried, right? Also, the average person isn't really likely to look down on you and be so critical that they perceive you as below average and no good. Sometimes we deal with people like this, but they're less common. So try not to worry about those one or a few opinions that you sometimes come across. So a strong frame doesn't change shape or form for other people. You should never be in a position where you're embarrassed about something and just waiting for the other person to change their mind about you. Like it's burning to know what they're thinking of you. You don't need that. That's a lack of independence. You're not being yourself, or you're not owning yourself. If you're just owning yourself and being yourself, then you don't need to know. You don't need to know what people think of you. So you never have to be in a place of uncertainty, asking, what do you think? And did I do this right? Et cetera, et cetera. This is needy, approval-seeking, dependent behavior. Authentic self-worth is not dependent on other people's circumstances. It's an internal attitude. And you can't control people's opinions at the end of the day. There's no guarantee what someone actually thinks of you anyway. So even if you try to give people the right impression, it's difficult. Some people are really stubborn. No matter what you do, they don't believe you. If you're quite young and you've just finished high school and are starting to live on your own, you're starting to realize you might be coming to the awareness that there are many different life skills and things you need to know to maintain a living. You're probably encouraged by your parents to keep a backup savings account for emergency if you ever lost your job or your ability to work. And maybe they encouraged you to budget your finances with a spreadsheet. So there are a lot of life skills that we need in order to get by safely in life. But with this being said, it's also possible to become jealous of people and uncertain in our worth when we find ourselves lacking certain skills. I found myself becoming a little bit certain when I was in my early journey, had moved on my own. Moved out on my own just a couple of years after high school, something like that. And I started to notice some people are really on top of things, I wasn't budgeting my money with spreadsheets or Excel for a while. And I would always mix up my insurance papers with my registration. my car registration right. Whereas some people know what those are, or they know how the government works, right? So I was not a Jason Bourne character. And I started to notice there are some people that are kind of like Jason Bourne out there, and I began to question my worth because of that. But if we refer to this chart here, this is a collection of life skills and knowledge prioritized from the most basic and essential to the least essential. As we gradually ascend the triangle in the real world, there are more advanced and intricate things that we can look into and know about, but they're more or less optional, like at the top of the triangle. So the point is, there are hundreds of different little skills and things you can know and learn that can make you come off as a very on top of it, Jason Bourne kind of person. Know-it-all character. And at the end of the day, however, the only skills and knowledge that are important are basically the ones found at the first few levels of the triangle. So I'm showing this because I think for young people who are, petty and detail-oriented, like I was, and perfectionist, it's easy to notice little things people do and just become jealous and lose that sense of worth and certainty in your frame and start developing that inferiority complex. When I was growing up, I used to overthink so many things. I used to be near the top of this triangle, and I knew about esoteric. I had a kind of esoteric knowledge, but I didn't have a lot of common knowledge. I practiced singing and dancing, and I knew how to dress well in my teens and a little bit later. But I was pretty laid back when it came to life skills. I only wanted to know the bare essentials. But then, sometimes you start questioning that because you find yourself with a girl, and then if you're a guy, you start thinking, gee, am I supposed to know these things? Like, should I be more like a man to have more life skills? Should I know more than her and stuff? And my point is, don't lose your frame. Don't get uncertain yourself. You need to not care about that sort of thing. It's nice. Some women like that. Definitely a guy who at least has his stuff together, but I don't think it's necessary to be a know-it-all. I think that's ideal. It's not really necessary. But yeah, sneaky things that the government does to us, different ways to make money, and what restaurant managers secretly do to their employees, checks, other kinds of things that are good to know, but not everyone knows. I didn't always know. But my point is, whatever or whoever you are, you should just own it. There's no use in losing your frame and becoming insecure. That's just going to hold you back. Don't worry too much about how the government works or legality or the language of money. Unless you want to become a lawyer or an entrepreneur or a real estate investor, right? You're not Superman or Wonder Woman. You don't have to be so good at things. It's just good to know important things. Maybe it's good to watch the news from time to time, to know what's going on in the world, right? To avoid significant things like cataclysms and pandemics, and to know if there are any places in the world that are better to live in, that are cheaper, that are safer, and that sort of thing. You don't have to know how to do your taxes on your own. You can get a good accountant, or maybe even file online. You don't have to know how everything works in life. When you adopt a sturdy frame for yourself, you're going from an uncertain am I mentality. It's uncertain and approval seeking, always second guessing and wondering what people think, to that certain, self-assured, I am mentality. Like Popeye. I am what I am. Keep in mind, you have your own opinions and way of life that I encourage you to keep. You can't get everyone to admire you. You can't look good in front of everyone. It's impossible, it's too hard, and it's soft in the head. If you're a laid-back person, you're going through life one step at a time, you have to own that. What if you meet somebody in a relationship and they're very ambitious, and are you gonna get all insecure again, thinking, oh gee, maybe I'm not being masculine enough because I'm not ambitious and I'm not or I'm not like going through life in such a fast pace and changing and evolving and stuff like that. No, screw that. Like, you want to go at your own pace, you should. You got live your own life. Just be certain about it. It doesn't mean you're not doing anything with your life. Right? People take their time figuring out what they want to do. A lot of people don't know what they want to do when they're with themselves. Like their career, but people don't know what they want to do. That's common. There's nothing wrong with that. I think not everyone is really tailored or by nature suitable for careers anyway, because how natural is it to just have one skill and do that your whole life without getting bored? I'm sure there are plenty of people who are better suited at going from job to job or career to career. There are definitely people who get bored easily and they can't do something more than like 5 years. My dad's like that. Doesn't mean they're not professional. You can have multiple professions in your life, but it does require more school and stuff, but that's one way to live, right? So when you're comfortable in your own skin and you accept yourself fully, you take on that I am mentality like Popeye, very self-assured, you're emotionally grounded, even the most harsh criticism you can handle because you don't take your image or reputation too seriously. The ability to not care what others think will endow you with fierce independence. Now let's get into a general wrong view. The Buddha taught that we should not invest in what he called the sign of things, the sign of the beautiful, the sign of the ugly, or the sign of pleasant and unpleasant sensations or situations. This includes the pleasant feeling we get from material gain. So the sign of something was his term, as far as I know, from my understanding, it's his term for the endless false concepts, labels, and meanings we create and associate with things. And instead, we have to get used to seeing things just as they are. One of the points is we shouldn't have so much preference and taste towards something, because it becomes very biased. The more we like or dislike something, the less we judge it. I mean, the less shrewdly we judge it. The more we judge it, but the less shrewdly we judge it, right? If you like something a lot, it can start looking better than it actually is. If you really don't like something or somebody, it can appear much worse than it actually is. And this is what the Buddha discourages. This is delusion. Because the ego tends to really like things and really dislike things. It has too much taste. This is not an accurate way of seeing. When you're in the jhanas or samadhi, you can see much more clear without the filters, the influences of emotion in particular. In relationships, for example, we might hold on to the expectation that someone will change one day, and out of that expectation, we might carry a false hope for them. What if they don't stop their alcoholism or their abuse or whatever it is? Then that hope was a sign or a misinterpretation. In that case, maybe it was too optimistic. There was too much preference toward a better solution, but it wasn't backed by facts or like a potential, and there was maybe too much excitement in it, too much hope. It was something that the concept seemed beautiful, but it was really a fantasy. So with this, whenever we're dealing with conflicts and confusion, we should always just look at the facts. So I'm getting into how to develop right view here. Whether those facts come from direct observation or from something like a legal document, statistics, and meditation, which is direct observation as well, that counts. Because the worst thing to do to ourselves and others is assume and theorize based on nothing. Nothing but a few paranoid observations that perhaps serve as evidence but are not actual proof. So maybe we started work with someone one day, and they walked in and didn't say hi to us, didn't start conversation with us, and immediately we began assuming that they don't like us or care about us. Well, I heard this example from one of my managers. She told me that she was very preoccupied one day, so she simply didn't have the energy or time to talk. She just walked in, just got right to work, didn't say hi, didn't think it was a big deal. She works there all the time, and she had already talked to everyone there. But that's not how the other person took it. The employee felt so rejected that one employee that was working with her one day, that she called the head chef that day, crying about how the manager doesn't like her. She felt so hurt by that. But as for myself, I saw the truth of that situation. I saw both sides of the story. From my manager's point of view, she told me that she has no preference toward the employee. She doesn't have anything against her, but she was just, how she felt that day. She was just really preoccupied and probably tired. She has to get up early in the morning and commute for an hour or so. Super busy. She's the manager. She's working 10 hours or so a day. So she was just trying to get her work done. Maybe a bit inconsiderate that she didn't say hi, but yeah, like I said, nothing against the employee. She was just in her head. So that's an example of taking a situation negatively and personally. The manager didn't mean to hurt this employee, but they felt so hurt by that. Now here's another example of a slightly different scenario in which a different manager of mine let his emotions distort his reality. So he believed something about me that was totally made up by him. What happened was that I had been a little bit sloppy with my work the previous night, so I left a few too many dishes in the dish pit, and I forgot to put the removable door that goes on the line counter fridge, the cooking fridge, which was a standard procedure back then to after saran wrapping the food, we put the lid back on. These are really minor slip-ups, but he noticed it. And on top of that, on that day, in that period, sometime recently, he had just found out the other day that his uncle had passed away. So he proceeded to explain to me how sad he was and unmotivated he was that day to work. He kept saying, "Oh, I just don't want to do this. You know what? I just don't want to do this. I'm going to take a break from this thing." And so I told him, "Hey, don't worry about it. I can do this for you. I'll take over all this for you if you want." But then after some exchanges, he just began unloading his baggage on me and spiraling down into this really bitter, sarcastic, vindictive rambling about all the things I do that dissatisfy him. Eventually, after listening to him complain for a bit and jumping through some of his hoops, like making me go to the fridge to get some food, even though he knew it was kept in the freezer, he mentioned that he gives me more privileges, even though he knows that all I do is talk to the server girls during my shift and drink afterwards. And that right there was the wrong view. This last remark he made was completely made up, because whether he knew it or not, sometimes people just believe the things that they say, these concepts in their head. The truth was, I had basically stopped talking to all the servers at work long before this manager started working with us. Just because we were always too busy to talk about anything, and the whole getting to know you phase had long passed. Furthermore, I didn't even drink back then, so what was this guy talking about making this claim? He was so bitter and vindictive that this fantasy of me came to his mind and he believed it, even though he never witnessed the facts to confirm it. In other similar cases, especially if we feel offended and angry, we take things negatively even when people are trying to be honest and sincere with us. So for these couple of cases that I just mentioned, these are examples of how our emotions get in the way of our discernment when we let ourselves get triggered. Emotion is a major element that primarily belongs to the amiable or supportive personality types. So since I mentioned Scorpio in the beginning, water signs need to keep their emotions under control when they're in conflict. Fire signs too, of course, because they get angry easily. So that's part of the driver personality, though. That's a little bit different than what I mentioned before. That's not amiable or analytical. I mean, amiable, supportive. Here's an example of taking things personally. I was at work one day, portioning the half-baked chicken wings, and I suggested to everyone around me that maybe we should mix the wings up so that each bag contains 5 wings and 5 drums. So this is all I said. But the girl who baked the wings and started debating and kind of arguing with me about it, so she started debating and she was saying, well, we don't have to put it like that, and you don't like the way I baked it, and I had to reassure her that and repeat myself a couple times that I wasn't criticizing her baking personally. I wasn't making a comment about the baking. I was actually just making a very random suggestion because it's just not something that we follow to do this. Because that's how we did it at my previous job, and we weren't doing that here. So it wasn't personal comment on this specific bake job. I was just making a random idea, random suggestion. So when we get ideas about people and concepts, and then we just imagine how people are and come up with assumptions and theories, these are all just fantasies. We cannot draw conclusions from them. So then, how do we develop right view? The Buddha had a rule about how we should handle any information that we come across. What he said was, do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in anything simply because it is spoken and rumored by many. Do not believe in anything simply because it is found written in your religious books. Do not believe in anything merely on the authority of your teachers and elders. Do not believe in traditions just because they have been handed down for many generations, but only after observation and analysis, when you find that things agree with you because of reason and are conducive to the benefit of others, should you accept it and live by it. This is a very good reminder about all the countless things we read and hear about every day, especially in this information age. He makes an excellent point. You're never guaranteed that something is true until you see it for yourself. And when he says that you should always scrutinize and analyze information, confirm through your own observation, what he's actually referring to is meditation, in addition to any other effective means, like your own Google search. Aside from scientific experiments, which are not always possible or practical for everyday people to run. So meditation is the best way to confirm things. This was normal back in the times of the Buddha. People meditated more, indigenous people were intuitive. That was their anchor of reliable knowledge. So it's truly remarkable that all of us have this psychic power that allows us to see the truth of things. We have to remember it and use it again. This is why many Buddhist schools make their students practice retrospective meditation at the end of the day. It's so they can review all the collected impressions from the day and discern what happened and learn from it. Here's another rule or a guideline. If they didn't say it, don't think it, right? If they didn't say that criticism about you, then you shouldn't assume that they're thinking it, because most of the time they're not. It's just your own insecurity and paranoia. Another essential practice is to communicate thoroughly. So if you're uncertain about something, then just be upfront with the person. Don't worry about the fact that you don't know some things or you forgot. You gotta ask. Just ask people what they meant by that thing they said or did. Right? That's how you get the clarity. Then at the end of the day, after we've collected some impressions to look into, some adversities or conflicts or arguments or whatever it is, or questionable things, mysteries, then we meditate. And since we're working on developing right view, the type of meditation we need is not any kind of meditation. It's not necessarily mindfulness or serenity meditation. We want analytical meditation. It's got to be retrospective. You're reflecting specific events of the day or specific things to learn about. This is known as vipassana in Buddhism.